that one was invalidated due to, I'd say, potentially careless responding or potentially having, we call it an idiosyncratic read of the items on that test. But what that means is they read the item and it's not exactly answered in the way that the item was written, or it's not pulling for the right information. So as a result of that, the entire profile was not interpretable. In response, Dr. Gray and I, during our interview, because we saw her 2 days in a row, we asked her about some of her responses to some of those specific test items. And then given that that was invalidated, we gave a second measure. That's when we gave the MMPI-2 to see if we could get some information from that. Unfortunately, those results were invalidated due to exaggeration.
When you say invalidated, are they invalidated based on Ms. Stauch's answers to the questions?
Yes.
In 302 questions, does that sound about right, or is it close?
There might be a little bit more, but that's about right.
A lot of questions.
Yes.
Multiple choice?
True, false.
True, false.
Yes. The PAI is on a Likert scale. I don't know if that matters, but.
I don't even know what that means.
Oh.
What does that mean? I'll tell you what matters.
No problem. A Likert scale is, to put it simply, do you ever experience this? Give a response 1 through 4. So the way it's worded specifically is you don't ever experience this particular symptom, or you sometimes experience it, or you frequently experience it, or you often or always experience it.
So scale 1 to 10 type thing?
Yeah, except it's 1 through 4. It's only 4 choices.
Okay. Going back to the forensic interview with regards to the competency evaluation, did Ms. Stauch ever give you any self-diagnosis of potential mental illnesses that she felt she had?
During the competency evaluation?
Yes.
During the competency evaluation, I don't recall specifically, but I do know that she talked a lot about being manic. She talked about slipping in and out of reality.
Is that consistent with bipolar disorder being manic?
Mania is a component of bipolar disorder. And just because somebody says that they're manic doesn't necessarily mean that they are or have been or have bipolar disorder.
Did she ever bring up anything about having another personality or multiple personalities during your competency interview with her?
She did not.
Did you ask anything about that?
During the competency evaluation, we weren't specifically looking for a dissociative identity disorder. But interestingly enough, when we were reviewing her responses on the PAI, the first test that we gave that had been invalid, one of the questions we asked her specifically about talked about having 3 or 4 personalities, and she had responded true to that item. So we asked her about that, and she essentially told us that sometimes she experiences different aspects of herself. So for example, sometimes she feels more compassionate, or sometimes she feels more competitive when she's playing sports, or sometimes she lacks empathy when she's around her family, but she did not talk about or specifically delineate having different personalities in the way that she did during our sanity evaluation.
And was that of note to you? Because I know the big picture is coming on the insanity evaluation, but the first contact with her, you asked her directly about dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities, and she denied that at that point?
Yeah, she definitely didn't endorse it in terms of the criteria for dissociative identity disorder and how they're written. So her response to us was pretty benign. We didn't think very much of it.
I imagine it became, what's the opposite of benign?
Important.
It became important when she did disclose that she had dissociative identity disorder during the insanity portion.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that when we get there as well a little bit more, okay? Needless to say, did you make some diagnosis of Ms. Stauch based on what you knew during the competency evaluation?
Yes.
And what diagnosis did you reach for Ms. Stauch?
We ultimately diagnosed her with a personality disorder, specifically a specified personality disorder noting borderline and narcissistic features.
Tell the jury about that. What does that mean?
Sure. A personality disorder is essentially maladaptive personality characteristics that are evident throughout the lifespan. We noted borderline and narcissistic features given her history of instability of relationships, her history of mood swings that were, I want to say, best delineated by her public defender at that time. When we consulted with the public defender, she was the one who described an intense reactivity of emotion to different things that just somebody who goes from 0 to 100 very quickly. We also noted her own self-report of impulsivity. Those were the primary features of a borderline personality that we noted with her. In terms of narcissistic features, she really touted her intelligence and her abilities. And when she spoke to us about her treatment in the jail, her expectations as it pertained to how she would not proceed with her defense, but how attorneys should treat her, there was some notable entitlement in that that gave us a hint that there might be some narcissistic features in there as well.
And the jury's heard about rule out, but did you have any rule out diagnosis with Ms. Stauch?
We did.
Can you just explain again what that means and whether or not that was relevant into your determination that she was competent to proceed?
Rule out diagnoses are essentially provided when you feel like you don't have enough information to say, yes, she meets these criteria for a particular diagnosis. We did a rule out for bipolar disorder as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. And we noted that this was a rule out because a lot of it was based primarily on her self-report. We didn't have much in terms of collateral information from past treatment records to substantiate the things that she was telling us. But given that her self-report was consistent with what one might see, we wanted to at least acknowledge that this could be there. We're just not 100% sure that it is.
Did you eventually, I think you already alluded to this, did you eventually rule out bipolar disorder during the insanity evaluation?
We did.
What about post-traumatic stress disorder? Were you able to rule that out at any time?
Not completely.
And we'll talk about that again when we get to the insanity evaluation portion. I just want to go back a second to the psychological testing that was conducted in relation to the competency evaluation. On page 7 of 10 of your report, you indicate that results of psychological testing showed that she was significantly over-reporting symptoms of serious mental illness, responding to items in ways atypical, even of genuine psychiatric impatience.
Yes.
This raises questions about the veracity of her self-report.
Yes.
What does that mean? And what are you basing that on?
So as I noted, these psychological tests that we gave, they had these validity measures. She invalidated the PAI. I already spoke to the reasons why. When it came to the MMPI, that one has even more validity scales on it, has more than just one that looks at issues of exaggeration, has 3. One of them is just generally, are you exaggerating symptoms of mental illness? And that one was very elevated. There is a third one on there that looks specifically, are you endorsing symptoms that even the very ill, psychiatrically hospitalized patients don't tend to endorse? And she endorsed a number of those to the point where that was elevated as well. So we give these tests, it's indicating to us there might be some feigning and exaggeration. We keep that in mind when considering the things that she is telling us.
And I'm going to jump all over the place, so I apologize, but did she also take the MMPI-2 during the insanity portion of her evaluation?
Yes, we gave it again.
Were the results consistent with what you just talked about from the competency evaluation time she took the test?
Yes, the second time we gave the MMPI-2, it was again invalidated due to exaggeration, and both of those scales that I've referenced were elevated.
And did she take it again with a Dr. Leach? And did you review the results from Dr. Leach, who's a psychologist, with regards to the MMPI-2?
Yes, she was given this test a third time. To my recollection, those results were not invalidated. But I don't remember specifically anything else about that testing. I'd have to go back and look through the notes.
Do you have your notes there on that? If you're not, I can approach with.
I have the summary that we wrote. All that we wrote about that third one is that she was getting close to those cutoff points for potential over-reporting symptoms of serious of mental illness.
Would that be consistent with the prior two MMPI-2 tests that she taken, both during your competency and insanity evaluation?
Consistent in that there was exaggerating of symptoms, inconsistent in that both of our tests were invalidated because of that.
Okay. And what does that tell you in the big picture with regards to her self-reporting, especially when she starts talking about dissociative identity disorder?
Unfortunately, I'd say that the indications of exaggeration or feigning undermines her own self-report.
In your report on the competency evaluation, in several sections, you allude to psychosis as to whether or not Ms. Stauch was hearing things that weren't there or seeing things that weren't there. Why do you note that in your report? What's the relevance of that?
During competency evaluations, we are taking into consideration what defendants say to us, but we are also observing them, looking for any signs of mental illness. Given that psychosis is one of the biggest things that we see for people who are eventually found incompetent, we're always assessing for psychosis in these types of evaluations. Individuals with psychotic disorders sometimes don't have the insight or awareness that they're ill. So we are looking to see if they are evidencing any signs that would indicate that they are potentially distracted, potentially hearing something that might not be, I want to say audible, but might not really be in the room, or whether they might be otherwise distracted by symptoms of psychosis.
Did you see any symptoms of psychosis with Ms. Stauch during any of your interviews with her during your entire time you spent with her?
None.
Does that also apply to insanity? Is psychosis something that you may be looking for in a defendant claiming to be not guilty by reason of insanity?
Yes.
Same reasons or different reasons?
With sanity, I would say that the number of qualifying mental illnesses is even more narrow than issues of competency or incompetency. But frequently, for sanity, psychosis is one of the primary issues that might result in somebody ultimately being opined insane at the time of the crime or found insane at the time of the crime. There are other mental illnesses that could qualify for that, but the specific legal definition of insanity requires a mental disease or defect. And the definition of that is essentially a mental illness that impairs one's perceptions or understanding of reality, which is psychosis.
And of course, that would have to go back to the time of the crime, that they were experiencing some kind of psychosis at the time of the crime. And that's what led them to commit the crime, perhaps? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, a psychosis or some other mental illness that impairs the perceptions and understanding of reality.
Is psychosis common with people who are found to be legally insane?
It is one of the primary reasons that might lead to somebody being found legally insane.
Can you give the jury, I'll say hypothetical because I don't want to infringe on anybody's rights, but a hypothetical of someone who might be insane at the time a crime is committed based on psychosis?
Sure. I think an obvious example might be, let's say, somebody who is diagnosed with schizophrenia. Maybe they started to exhibit signs and symptoms of schizophrenia during their early adulthood. They have a strong background or history documenting their schizophrenia, and then let's say they do murder a family member because they believe they have a delusion that that individual isn't really their family member, but is some sort of imposter trying to take over the government, and they are therefore trying to save the world by murdering this particular individual.
And so what's the second part of the insanity evaluation that you look at? Because it's much more than just having a severe mental disease or defect, isn't it?
Yes.
What's the second and third component of the insanity evaluation?
So the first one is whether they meet the threshold of a mental disease or defect. And then the definition of insanity here in the state of Colorado, there's two parts. The first one is that mental illness impairs their understanding of right from wrong. The second part is whether that mental illness impairs their capacity to form the specific intent as it's written in the specific crime charged.
Is that also referred to as the specific culpable mental state?
Yes.
And it could be intent, could be knowingly, could be recklessly, could be after deliberation, that kind of thing?
Correct.
And so I want to talk about the right from wrong in an insanity case, and I'll use your hypothetical. A family member is murdered due to the belief that they're going to take over the government, and they felt like they had to kill. Is that basically what we're saying?
Yes.
And the mental disease that it's severe enough to cause them to think that. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, the mental disease or defect has to be tied directly to their understanding of what was going on at the time of the crime, potentially their motivation, their behavior, their emotions, and their thought processes at that time.
And so if they did not have the capacity to know right from wrong, they would think it would be right to kill that family.
Right, essentially for a greater good.
So would they do anything to cover up the fact that they killed that family member if they thought it was the right thing to?
In the sanity evaluations that I and some of my colleagues have conducted, sometimes people don't, and sometimes people do.
Is there also an issue, well, I mean, in your hypothetical, would it be uncommon if someone was truly legally insane to say, what's the problem here? I had to kill this person. Don't you understand that?
I want to say that we do frequently see that where the individuals stick around following the actual murder. They don't run away. They don't try to hide. They don't try to obscure evidence.
And the second aspect of it, forming the culpable mental state or having the capacity to do that, is it really the nature of the killing that kind of dictates their actions, determine whether or not they had the capacity to form that intent?
Yeah, when it comes to the capacity associated with the specific mental state, as evaluators, we take a look at the statutory language associated with each of the crimes to see what is the mental state that we're looking at. And we look at those definitions, with intent, specifically discusses whether they have a conscious objective in mind. Knowingly is more of whether they have an awareness that their actions are going to cause a behavior or that their actions are going to cause a result. Recklessly is whether they are consciously not paying attention to the fact that their actions could cause a result. So we take a look at those definitions and we think through that cognitively in terms of what were they demonstrating at the time of the offense, even in their own self-report. What are they saying that they were thinking? What are they saying about their own behavior? And we're really looking at whether or not they have the capacity to make judgments, reasons to think things through.
Is the type of weapon that may be used, does that come into consideration when you're making that type of evaluation?
It can be. I would say it's not often a central focus of the evaluation.
Let's jump into your insanity evaluation of Ms. Stauch, okay? Let me see how we're doing on, Judge, we're doing okay on time? All right.
Yeah.
We now are in February of 2022. Defendant pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Is it the same process on how the state hospital is informed and then you and Dr. Gray are appointed to do the evaluation for the insanity?
Yes.
So did you request anything in addition in the discovery, the police reports, things like that, in preparation for your insanity evaluation?
We did. For the sanity evaluation, similarly to the competency evaluation, one of the first things we do is consult with both sides, defense and prosecution, to ask why was the issue of sanity raised, what are the concerns you might have, or lack thereof. In our sanity evaluation, we received a number of additional records from defense, Mr. Tolini specifically and his team. We reviewed the discovery material. Again, we reviewed the competency evaluation that had been written by Dr. Grimmett that had been new at that point in time. We also reviewed our own competency evaluation. And in addition, we conducted some collateral phone calls with individuals familiar with Ms. Stauch.
And who did you contact, the individuals who are familiar with Ms. Stauch?
We spoke with Al Stauch, her ex-husband. We also spoke with Brenda Acquard, her aunt. We made attempts to contact 3 other individuals, but were unsuccessful.
And as part of the things that you talked about with Mr. Tolini and his team, was that obtaining hospital records, medical background on Ms. Stauch for your review?
Yes.
And did they provide you with medical records for your review?
They did.
Did they provide you with any medical records from Canada from this alleged inpatient psychiatric treatment that Ms. Stauch's telling you about?
There was ultimately nothing from Canada.
again, I'm jumping ahead, I apologize, but during the interview, did Ms. Stout talk to you about a Dr. Fleischman, does that sound familiar?
Yes.
And was that an individual that she said she was having therapy with for a year in Florida?
Yes.
Did you get any records from a Dr. Fleischman with regards to psychiatric treatment that he may have done with the defendant?
We ultimately didn't. If I'm remembering correctly, Ms. Stauch told us that we could receive that information from a social worker working on her defense team, an individual named Kyle. But ultimately, the only thing associated with Florida that we received was a letter that accepted her into intensive treatment at House of Freedom.
What was that about? Do you recall?
Our understanding of House of Freedom is that it's essentially some sort of residential treatment for substance use. But Ms. Stauch clarified for us that all of that had been in error, that she had gone for just a day but didn't stay when she realized what it was for.
Did you have any indication back in her personal background that she even lived in Florida for a year period?
There was nothing to my recollection that she lived in Florida, just that she frequented Florida.
And I apologize. I already asked you who you talked to on the phone, the relatives.
You did.
Okay. Did you review the discovery again in preparation for your insanity evaluation?
Yes.
And why did you do that?
Because 2 years had passed, and sometimes it's very hard to remember who you saw a couple of weeks ago, let alone a couple of years ago.
Sure. So tell us about the interview, and we're going to get into some video portions for the court's benefit. I don't, if the court wants me to jump into the videos before the break, or we can wait and do it after the break.
Let's try to go about 3:15.
Okay.
I don't know where that puts your evidence, but let's try and do that.
Well, at this time, there is a stipulation for the admission of the forensic interview for the insanity evaluation that was conducted on March 24th and June 29th of 2022. And so in my hand, I have People's Exhibits 723 through 728. Each exhibit is a morning or afternoon session with the interview with Ms. Stauch, and they're broken up based on how we received them in discovery.
And defense, do you agree?
Your Honor, that's correct. We had stipulated that both insanity evaluations performed by Dr. Torres and Dr. Gray. We submitted evidence, as well as the videotape recording by Dr. Lewis will be submitted as evidence. Well, neither side is going to play the entirety of all the interviews, but then bits and pieces may be played as each party wishes.
All right. I think for purposes of the record, though, because there's 6 of them and they are all videos, but it sounds like they're of different sections. For purposes of the record, you need to identify what each one is.
Sure, Your Honor. And if it helps, People's Exhibit 723 is labeled Stauch, March 24th, 22-1. People's Exhibit 724 is labeled Stauch, March 24th, 2022-2. People's Exhibit 725 is labeled Stauch, March 24th, 2022-3. People's Exhibit 726 is Stauch, June 29th, 2022-1. People's 727 is labeled Stauch, June 29th, 2022-2. And People's Exhibit 728 is labeled Stauch, June 29th, 2022-3.
All right. Exhibit 723 through 728 will be admitted. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, let me just get to my notes here. What I'd like to do now, Dr. Torres, is I want to play a portion of your interview that was conducted on March 24th, 2022 which is a portion of People's Exhibit 723. And then I'm going to have some follow-up questions afterwards. This is about 7 minutes long.
From where?
Over here.
We're going to play it on the TV screens.
Oh, I'm at the feed.
And so for the record, we're going to play People's Exhibit 723, starting at 18:28 in the interview and stopping at 25:32.
Dr. Torres, I've given everybody else the option if you would. It's only about 7 minutes, but if you want to step down and be somewhere else, if you want to stay there, that's okay too.
I think this is okay. Thank you.
You mentioned that
I just want to make sure the volume's good, Your Honor. We paused it at 18:32.
As it'll go.
around the time,
Did you want to ask the jury if that was sufficient volume?
That work, that's about as high as it'll go anyway, so not much I can do about it after
We have
that.
some control over here too, if not all the way up on here yet either.
Okay. All right, sounds like,
started creating different personalities. Yeah, could you tell us more about them?
So I wasn't allowed to go to people's houses in the night, or I was scared to let people come to my house and spend the night. Because I didn't ever know if he was gonna have like an episode. Like when we had like episodes, we'd have to like run to the car and drive around till he passed out and sleep, you know, and then meet back in the house. So I didn't ever know, like if I had friends staying for the weekend, like I didn't want them to be exposed to that, you know, because people pick on, you know, in school, people pick on, you know. So that, around the time I was like 10 or 11, I just started like almost like being able to like take myself out of the situation and let another part of me be the one getting molested. And that was when I came up with Harmony, and Harmony can like tell you about the beef and dip. I try not to do it because I've stored it in a place far away, you know what I mean? But so I started let Harmony be the one be molested and not me, because that way, if my friends ever ask me, you know, like, why come you can't come over? I could create like a perfect picture in my world that you can come over one day, it'll be great, we'll do this, we'll play ball, we'll hang out. I didn't want them to go to that world where they had to know like who's living abuse. I was getting molested, because my friends would have been like their moms and stuff like that would have been like, you need to tell somebody, you need to do this. So. And I was always scared of losing softball too, so that was like my outlet.
So you created her.
Mhm.
And it's a personality, so did you create anyone else?
Remember I told you I lived in a trailer? That was in 1996. That was during the Olympics, the U.S. women's gymnastics team that won a gold medal. And that, I played another personality doing that. That's Christina Brianna, and she's friends with like Carrie Strug, Dominic Dawes, and a bunch of people that are on the team. And like I had the whole trailer to myself, so she would like be able to like create apparatuses and like do like balance beams off stuff, you know, like cause maybe days my mom would be gone, you know, and so that was just the way I would cope with, and not knowing if my mom was ever gonna take us back there, because I knew she would. Every time she said she was never going back, we go back. So that helped me through that year, because I had to stay really good in school, you know what I mean, because my plan was like to get out one day, you know, and do really good, which I did end up doing really good in school. So, you know, I have a doctorate degree, but like, if it wasn't for being able to use these different, I guess you could probably like personas or whatever, I wouldn't have been able to live with her.
We have Harmony, Christina was the other one.
That was from when I was little. As I got older, there was more, there's Letecia, and there's Taylor, and there's Maria, she's protector. It's like, I don't, sometimes, like, if you look at like, a lot of my different social medias, they have different names. different grades, different one. You could always tell if you're gonna play softball because like if I was in Letecia, like Letecia at my ambidextrous, so I could hit left-handed and right-handed, and like sometimes people wouldn't understand when I go to the plate, and they'd be like, hey, you need to hit left-handed, and you need to, like, cause there'd be like a run if you know like baseball. If there's like a run in second and third, they're like, you need to hit left-handed, but if I was in that personality, I couldn't hit left-handed.
We have, as you got older, there was Letecia Taylor. You said Taylor was the protector.
Yeah, Taylor's my main no, Marie's my protector. Taylor's my main personality.
Thank you. Maria.
Mhm. And Victoria is the only personality that I have like empathy in because I store so much of, you know, trauma. If you want me to like be, like if a friend's talking to me and they need me to give them advice, I have to switch to Victoria to actually try and be empathetic at all. Like severely empathetic, you know what I mean? I just don't have to.
All right. Taylor's the main personality. Maria's the protector. Victoria is the one who has the most empathy and kindness.
And then Letecia, she's bipolar, she would be doing the most, like, you'll notice when I'm on Letecia, actually the psychiatrist the other day came to change my meds, she was doing the most, she's bipolar tech, and she was up for 4 or 5, 6 days at a time, you know, so. I think it's Kepler or something like that.
So you're currently on Kepler.
Kept something, yeah, that. Kept from. I was gonna put me back on the Lexapro, but I'll be eating too much on it. I don't like it.
So who are we talking to right now?
Yeah.
When you say Taylor is the main personality, what do you mean by that?
It's like, okay, so you notice like where Letecia, she's like more like into her like thug life. I guess you can say like rap music, that kind of thing. But Taylor's everything is like Letecia all wanted to be because she gets to be like, yeah, kind to everybody, but like successful. She has a whole separate world, you know. She's married to Tyler. They have kids.
This is everything that Taylor wanted to be, and Letecia is married to Tyler.
No. Taylor is everything Letecia. You got it backwards. Yeah, Taylor is married to Tyler and have 3 kids, Ariana, Alicia, and Adriano.
Okay, we stopped it at 25:32. Before we get into what Ms. Stauch had to say here, who is present during this interview?
It was just Ms. Stauch, myself, and Dr. Gray.
And why was there no attorneys in there with you?
We don't typically allow the attorneys to be in sanity evaluations with us.
Why is that?
The primary reason is because we would want to prevent any potential interference by an attorney, whether it would be a prosecutor or a defense attorney or somebody telling the defendant to withhold any information or to elaborate further on any information.
And was that Ms. Stauch that we saw in the video?
Yes,
Is it the same Ms. Stauch that's seated to my left with her head down on a notebook here in between the 2 attorneys?
it is.
May the record reflect identification of the defendant.
The record will so reflect. Go ahead.
So let's talk about what she's saying. What impact does it have when she says, I created these personalities?
When it comes to dissociative identity disorder, that's not the understanding in terms of what that looks like. It's not about creating or having control over several distinct personalities.
And so what is dissociative identity disorder, and why do you say that's not about it?
Dissociative identity disorder, in short, it's when somebody is experiencing two or more personality states, and it's usually accompanied by some sort of amnesia, blackouts, a period of not remembering what you were doing. It's a complex diagnosis. Essentially, the different personality states themselves are not controlled. When an individual has this diagnosis, they might not even initially be aware that they are exhibiting different personality traits, hence the blackouts or the loss of memory for periods of time. And the emergence of these different personality states, we call them alters, but the emergence of them can be very random, not necessarily I'm going to now go into this personality state and now I'm going to go into the second personality state. So the fact that she told us that she created them herself, in terms of our conceptualization, we started to wonder about the possibility that she was exaggerating or feigning this particular diagnosis.
And does this relate back to the competency evaluation when you asked her directly about the way she answered on the psychological testing with regards to, I believe you said 3 different personalities?
That, I would say, was more in retrospect. When we were doing the sanity evaluation, I don't even recall remembering that specific detail from the competency evaluation.
When you went back and reviewed that, that's when you saw that detail?
Yes.
Okay. What about the fact that she mentions that one of her personalities or her personas was involved with the gymnastic team and that she's friends with the gymnastics team? Is that something unusual, perhaps, to have that persona?
Again, for me, it was her report that this was a creation of hers, and that it's associated with something that was happening, per her report, in 1996, the Olympics that year. And if I'm remembering correctly, she noted that that was just another personality that she created at that time.
With people who actually suffer from dissociative identity disorder, would they know the other personas?
Sometimes.
Explain.
So it's going to be, I'm going to say, case by case dependent, but the research suggests that the clinical presentation of a dissociative identity disorder, they used to think that there was no memory or awareness of these other personalities that one might be experiencing. But now it's thought to be more porous, meaning that there is some awareness that this might be happening, but it's going to be a case by case thing.
Okay. We're going to see some more examples of this in some video takes, but just one last question about this. You mentioned earlier that there's some amnesia or blackouts. Would people who suffer from dissociative identity disorder remember what they did when they are in another personality?
They might have some awareness of it, and sometimes they might not.
Is it on a spectrum? Are there more severe issues with people who may suffer from that diagnosis than others?
Yes.
And is that consistent with all the mental illnesses in the DSM-5? Some are worse than others depending on the person.
Yes, even within a particular diagnosis, someone might have a more severe presentation than another person.
The next portion of the video we're going to watch looks like it's close to 10 minutes long. It's going to be on People's Exhibit 724. starting at 1448 and ending at 2455. Again, if you want to sit back here or sit up there, whatever you're more comfortable.
This is fine, thank you.
$14.48, yes.
And just decided to get married, so that would happen, so I think we probably should, for real estate, like, that would cover. But it was to keep from having to do those crazy things that were without custody. We wanted to make sure whatever we did never hurt anything to do with children. So it was good on that, but then early in our marriage, Albert goes to Oklahoma. He's away at Oklahoma, he's away in Colorado Springs for training. And I'm taking care of the kids on his weekends to make sure he didn't lose his weekend. So I would have the kids on his weekend, but he would be in Oklahoma and he'd be in Colorado Springs. So like a lot of our marriage, I'd say 85% of it, we never even lived together. We never lived together until Colorado, like officially lived together. Because yeah, that was when we moved to Colorado Springs, because we moved to Colorado Springs in March, but he didn't come yet from Alaska. And I had got the kids in school and stuff, so we really didn't live together. And so I started working at French, and I got back from probably graduating high school, and then we had all went on the cruise. So really, it was August 2019 when we actually like lived together. So it was more of like almost like a convenience. Like I feel like the marriage of convenience was I did everything for the kids. I took care of the kids. You know what I'm saying? I worked and we could buy whatever we wanted because we both had really good incomes. And I know that whatever, but that's the truth. You know what I mean? That's what it more so like.
When you started dating Albert, were you still living in North Carolina?
So this was South Carolina.
Living in South Carolina?
I was living in South Carolina.
Did you and Albert ever have any problems?
No, like, okay, so our mom is a nurse practitioner for a psychiatrist. A lot of extensive experience in psychiatry. She would constantly tell Albert, I needed to be on medication or I need to be doing this throughout our whole marriage. You know what I mean? So that would cause a lot of problems. Like even if you look at the report that she wrote police before I got arrested, she talks about, you know, in there about, you know, 1 minute I'm this way, 1 minute I'm that way, you know what I mean? So like, basically was married to him and her, you know what I'm saying? So it wasn't necessarily a lot of physical, there was not, you know, any physical abuse, it was a lot of emotional abuse. He's a narcissist, so, you know, he's the victim and everything, he took advantage of my mental, because I way my mental status would be, and like, go to his mom about it, and they'd all try to like, tell me I need to be on this meds, or I need help for this, or I'm crazy, you know. So it was more so mental and emotional. You know, there's never any physical up until the end. When we got custody of the kids, he thought I was in cahoots with me, which I guess you can kind of say I was. Because if you look at my phone records, you'll see my plan was leaving, but I didn't want to leave the kids. There were messages you can see me say, I don't want to leave the kids because I know they will get taken care of. So we had custody of them. But their mom, she started dabbling in drugs, but she wasn't ready to get the kids back yet. So my plan to her was always like, I'm gonna let you know right before I leave. You better have a house, you better have everything together, and then I'll help you get the kids back to Carolina. So when he found out that I, what he calls it, was in cahoots with her, that's when he started getting violent and aggressive, like throwing lamps in the house, there's a video on my phone they have where he stopped the car, because I record it all the time, because I wanted to keep all that evidence for Landon to have. And he's beating the piss out of Gannon, and he's flinging stuff like irate because he thinks we're all in cahoots against him. to get the kids back. And he's like, you're just trying to take the kids from me. You're trying to get them back to their mom. So once I got the Colorado Springs and we lived together, that's when it became like that. It was not, there was no hitting me with his hands. It was just slinging stuff in the house, being angry, slamming doors, punching doors. Like, he would get like that because he swerved down. I was working with her. I mean, which I guess you can see it as me working with her, but I felt like if I left, they wanted to be taken care of. Like, he was going to do schoolwork. He was going to make sure they were clean. Nobody, he wouldn't. So he doesn't have that nurturing piece or that ability to multitask or none of those things. So in a way, I was kind of working with her to get the kids back home, but I guess he took that as me going against him. I was doing what was right for them. You know. I believe it.
And so the kids would have been his two kids.
Right. If you look at all the school paperwork, who always talked to, up until he realized what I was doing, that I was collecting evidence to get the kids back home to her, because she had already promised me that I could see the kids whenever I wanted in Carolina, like, that she would not take them out of my life. She had already told me that. And so, like, once I started collecting, he would notice I'd be driving down the road and I'd have the phone on. And I'd just start collecting everything, because I'm already a paranoid person. But I knew, like, if I start collecting stuff, you know, like, I would have it to give to her for everything. Because I wanted her to get her sobriety first, get a home, whatever. And once he noticed I started doing that, that's when it got a little bit violent with him speaking. I was trying to set him up and take the kids from him. Like, his weren't paranoia. His was just because he knew I was right. He knew that everything I was collecting was preparing for when I left. Because if you even look at my phone searches on the evidence, you'll see that, like, I was like looking for a place to stay. I was like getting everything in order. I had already told Gannon, like, on Wednesday, I'm going to call your mother and tell her what's going on, but we gotta wait till Wednesday. The reason I said wait till Wednesday, because I was starting that flight attendant job, and I wanted to make sure that everything had went through my flight attendant, that I had been like officially hired. I was going to the training, everything before I said something to her that, hey, I'm leaving, you know what I mean? Here's our plan. This is what we're going to do to get the kids back. They wanted to go with me, but I told them, I was like, don't charge me with kidnapping. We can go across the country. We got to have a plan, you know, so. But that was always the plan. So they can call it cahoots, whatever they want to call it, but my plan was to make sure I know that Rhonda and Matt would take care of that. Landon's mom and dad. I know as long as they, because when I was in South Carolina and I had the kids, they were the only two people that helped me with anything. I had by myself, so I knew they would be safe with them. Whatever I needed to do to prepare them to have them, that was the method I was taking. So.
And about how many months, maybe before this election had happened, did things take that where he really became president?
I know it sounds minimal. I've created so many different personas in my life, and so many different ways to cope with everything I've been through. The sunlight is one of them. Like, being in somewhere warm, being somewhere where I can use those coping skills to help me when I have a flashback, you know, when I wake up from a nightmare, so I tried to talk to him about it. And I said, hey, Colorado and me just don't, you know, like, it's causing me to get worse mentally. I was having more of my manic episodes. I was just like having more episodes where I forget and lost of time. And a lot of it was because I didn't have those coping skills. Like, you can't play softball here in Colorado. You know what I mean? Not during the months that I'm used to playing back home. And so, you know, all these skills I built over time were taken from me in Colorado. So when I got here officially in August, it was weird because I had to do outside duty work too. For teaching, you know, to have like outside duty, stuff like that. I was freezing in September, you know, and I was like, I wanted to do something else, or let me go be a flight attendant where I could do warm sometimes. And I'll set my schedule where I'll be with the kids a few days a week, and I'll be a flight attendant a few days a week. Because I knew mentally I needed that outlet because I'd used it all my life. that's when he took offense to it of like, if you're gonna be a flight attendant, there's nobody gonna be here to watch the kids. And I was like, I'll be here on these days, but these days I want. So that was around September, October of 2019. Because I had applied for a flight attendant job and I was supposed to start it the next year because they have like a waiting list or whatever. That's when it got like that, when he saw that I was actually gonna be leaving, I was gone part-time. He can't operate without having someone do everything. So that's.
We just stopped it at 24:55. Before we get into the content of what Ms. Stauch is saying, could you give the jury understanding of the form of questions you're asking? In other words, are you suggesting the answer when you ask questions, or are you wanting to get information from her and explain why you do that?
Sure. During a lot of these forensic evaluations, we like to ask questions in an open-ended manner to give the defendant the opportunity to explain their life story or their perceptions to us. We try to avoid, to the best of our ability, yes or no answers. We definitely don't like to feed them information, especially when it relates to diagnosis that they can then regurgitate back to us or to someone else. So the questions we ask tend to be open-ended.
And is that what we see in this last segment we saw? Is that kind of how the entire interview went? You would ask a question and you would get a answer and there would be rambling and there'd be nonstop talking. Is that the sense of how the whole evaluation went?
She did have a tendency to ramble during our evaluation. I think that there were times where maybe we asked a question, especially as it pertained to the offense, where she spoke at length, easily 30 minutes, 40 minutes before we asked any follow-up.
And with regards to this segment we just watched, did you or Dr. Gray ask questions about her relationship with Al shortly before the crime?
We did.
And is that the response we're seeing where she's talking about, I was gonna leave Al, that kind of thing?
Yes, we were trying to understand the nature of her relationship with Mr. Stauch since it's relevant to this case.
And did you have an opportunity to listen to several pretext phone calls that were conducted between Al Stauch and the defendant, Letecia Stauch?
Yes.
And is what she's saying in this last segment consistent with what she's saying in these pretext calls, where she's asking him, are we going to be together? Are we going to get back together, bring our family back together over and over and over again?
I do remember that from the pretext calls. Yes, this report would be inconsistent with that specifically. And I might suggest that both things could be true at the same time.
Sure. It's complicated, right? It's a relationship. You don't know all the behind the scenes information that's going on. Is that a fair
Yes.
statement?
Yes.
How about when you talk to Al Stauch on the phone as part of your insanity evaluation? Did he give you information about their relationship just prior to Gannon being killed?
He also noted that things were rocky, to say the least, that there had been some thoughts about separating and that no actions had been taken at that time.
What about when she talks about living in Colorado and not being able to play softball and she needs to be in the sun, that kind of thing? Was that any relevance to your evaluation when it comes to insanity?
When it comes to insanity, the primary focus of that evaluation does tend to be at the time of the offense. And it's helpful for us to have an understanding what the defendant was going through. I'd say even up to a couple of weeks before the actual event, just to understand what was their emotional state, what symptoms might they have been exhibiting at that time. Did they undergo any particular stressors that could have exacerbated symptoms of mental illness at that time?
I want to talk about the stressors. When we talk about dissociative identity disorder, is there a triggering event that might commonly be seen in people who suffer from that mental illness that causes them to switch personalities?
There can be, and at the same time, it can be random.
In this clip, again, she mentions switching personalities. Do you recall her saying something about that?
I'm trying to remember specifically what was said during this clip. Would you be able to remind me?
Sure. She mentioned something about being able to switch personas based on the weather and how she can adapt to different things. And do you recall that line of her answer? If you don't, it's not that.
Not specifically, no.
Your Honor, this would be a good time to take a break if the